Hello everyone and welcome to Section 4. As you recall, the first step in analyzing any income-producing property is to assemble the cash flow analysis, which is what we will be doing right now. Now on the screen you can see that I've already set up the cash flow, and on the right-hand side, this is where all the data is input. When using this spreadsheet, please enter any data into the orange section. Once you enter that data, then the cash flow will automatically be assembled on the left-hand side. Let's review each of these assumptions now. In the offering memorandum, it was stated that the two-bedroom units, namely Units 1 and 2, will be rented for $2,250. It also showed that the one-bedroom, one-bath units are renting for $1,750, which is a total of $8,000 per month. Our first step will be to verify those rent numbers. There are several methods for estimating market rents. Sometimes you can call your local real estate agent and ask if they have any information on rentals within the area. They may be able to provide that. However, they usually don't have much rental information available. Another option is to visit one of the online services available. One of them is called Rent-O-Meter. I'm going to show you that right now. Let's check the market rents for our property. To begin, simply enter the property address, 757 Redondo. Here it is. And then, I select the type of report I want. I want a summary report for 1 to 4 units, so I'll show you all the rentals. Select Analyze. Here are the results. What they're providing is the range of rents within one standard deviation of the average rent. For the one-bedroom units, the price ranges from $1,455 to $2,089. And our one-bedroom units rent for $1,750. Our rent looks okay. They also have another percentile range from the 10th to the 90th percentile deviation, which spans 1,170 to 2,375. Again, we're 1,750. Our rent appears okay. Now let's check the rent for the two-bedroom units. Within the 25th to 75th percentile, the rent range is $1,915 to $2,843. And if you increase the deviation, the price ranges from $1,499 to $3,260. That's okay because we're at $2,250. The rents seem fine. We may be able to increase the rents. So, there is no question about the rental rates at this point. Let's return to the spreadsheet and continue our discussion about the income and expenses for this property. The total rental income is $96,000 per month. However, there is also additional income from the garages, which are rented for $400 per month. There are 4 garages. That will provide an extra rental income of $1,600 per month. The gross potential income is $115,200 per year. Next, let's look at vacancies. Well, they're showing 3% on the offering memorandum. That is a very aggressive number for several reasons. One is simply that 3% of the $115,200 of rent. Well, that's $3,456 per year in lost rent. That means out of these units, only 1 unit was vacant for a month during the entire year. Everything else was leased for the entire year. That again is an aggressive assumption. I'm not sure if that goal can be met. Keep in mind that when there is a vacancy, it's not just the lost rent that you have. There are many more costs involved than downtime. It takes time to recarpet, repaint, possibly make some repairs, put the property on the market, and then try to find a tenant and have them move in within a couple of weeks. Or maybe it will take at least a month after it's fixed up to find a tenant. Limiting the vacancy to 3% or $3,456 per year is aggressive. We may want to reconsider this later in our analysis. Let's continue to review the expenses. The first one is property taxes. To calculate property taxes, we need to know 2 things. One is the purchase price, and the other is what is the property tax rate. Before I proceed, I will briefly cover property taxes in California. If you're living anywhere else, you should research the property taxes in your area and how they're calculated. In California, the code, as it currently reads, can be confusing. Simply put, it states that property taxes are based on the market value of the property, which is established when an assessable event occurs. The most common assessable event is the sale of the property. The purchase price at that time becomes the assessed value. The tax code also states that property taxes are limited to 1% of the assessed value, plus any special assessments approved by local voters. That's what we need to find out. What is the tax rate for this property in Long Beach? We know the purchase price, but need to determine the tax rate. Where do we get that? We can contact our favorite title representative, and they should have that information. I went ahead and called my title representative and got the information. This is a property profile, which displays information such as the total assessed value for the property, as shown by scrolling down. To determine the tax rate for this property, divide property taxes by the assessed value. That will give the tax rate, and it will not change when the property gets reassessed from the sale. Let's return to the spreadsheet and work through the calculations. That's what was done right here. If the property taxes of $18,517 are divided by the assessed value of $1,420,665, the result is a property tax rate of 1.303%. If you multiply 1.303% by $1,400,000, the result is $18,242. That will be the new property taxes. Okay, next, landscaping. Again, for these types of expenses, there's no need to guess. Just give your landscaper a call. I'd be willing to bet that in that area, it will cost roughly $200 a month, because there is very little grass. In terms of insurance, there's no reason to guess otherwise. Contact your insurance agent, provide them with information about the property, and they'll give you a quote. The number that the seller had was $1,480, which was way too low. It's likely 3 times more for this type of property. I input $6,000. Now, reserves, I'll come back and discuss that in just a few minutes. Let's talk about maintenance first. This can also be a number that's a little more challenging to grasp. My experience suggests that the monthly maintenance cost for a unit is approximately $80. All right, so if you do the math, taking $80 times 12 times 4, that's $3,840 per year for total maintenance. That might be a little light, but this property has been renovated, so $3,840 is probably close enough. The next expense is property management, which is typically calculated as 4% of the effective gross. Effective gross is simply taking the gross potential income, $115,200, and subtracting the vacancy. You're left with an effective gross of $111,744, which means the property management fee will be $4,470. Next is water and utilities. According to the offering memorandum, tenants are responsible for paying all their utility bills except for water. Then the question becomes, what is the expected water bill each month? I found that in this area, the cost works out to be $110 per unit. However, because the landlord will be paying for the water for the grass and any other plants and shrubs that may be around, I typically add one more unit. $110 per unit times the total number of units, which is 4 plus 1, so 110 times 5 times 12. That's $6,600 per year. Next is the trash. Again, there's no need to guess. Contact the local trash company and ask them. There is likely a bin charge, and it will be approximately $150 per month. The trash will be approximately $1,800 per year. Okay, those are the operating expenses for this property. However, all of the operating costs are expected to increase over time. Let's examine how inflation can be managed. Let's start with the rent. It's always a big issue deciding how much to increase rents. Is there inflation? Yes. And are rents going up right now? Yes, it is more significant than the inflation rate. But I'm going to set all those issues aside. I will incorporate a typical inflation rate of 3%, and that's what is input here. For year 1, there's no inflation. Year 2, 3%, and then 3% thereafter. Okay, looking at the garage rents, it's the same thing. Add a 3% annual increase to it. Okay, for now, we'll revisit this later in our analysis. All expenses were inflated by 3% except for property taxes. In California, property taxes cannot increase more than 2% per year. That is built in here. Now, let's go back over here. All of these assumptions about the rent and income are then projected here, and it's done automatically for you. You can examine each of these cells to view the formula that was entered. What's happening is that the original number we entered, such as the rent numbers, is being inflated at the inflation rate specified in cell R8, which you go over here. This is R8, 3%. So it increased it. The rent of $116,400 is increased by 3% to $119,792. That same process was applied across the board, encompassing all income and expenses, again, except for property taxes, which were inflated at only 2%. That is how all of this is done. To summarize, if I don't have the information, I start taking steps such as contacting the local title representative and requesting a copy of the tax bill. Additionally, any other relevant information they can provide may be helpful. I use the online service Rent-O-Meter for market rent and expense information. There are many similar sources online. Okay, I think that's enough for this. Oh, I forgot to mention a couple of things. We did a projected holding period of 5 years. So the question arises, why did you put in a 6th year? The reason I do that is that we will need this information to determine a sales price at the end of year 5. I go into much more detail about that near the end of this course. I'll explain all of that later. Let's briefly discuss reserves. What are reserves? All the expenses that are listed here typically occur regularly. They're ongoing and occur periodically. However, certain expenses arise irregularly. For instance, repairing the roof. For those types of items, an adjustment is needed. It's been my experience that, similar to a 4-unit project, you can expect a significant expense every 7 years. That's where this number came from. A considerable roof expense will cost $10,000. If I took that number and divided it by 7, the result is $1,428. You shouldn't ignore those expenses. If you leave that out, it means you will achieve a significantly higher NOI, which will result in a higher price. You want to ensure that you include information about reserves and avoid overpaying for the property. Okay, let's move on to the next section.